Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. This morning we received lots of very important updates, and first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction, where the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Verkhnia Tersa, which is located to the east of the cities of Zaporozhye and Orekhov. And according to the report that was published during the 22nd of May of 2026 by pro-Russian sources, both by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the Group of Forces East, we have adjusted the map. So this is the video that was published today by the Group of Forces East, and here we can see how exactly the Russians were fighting for this key settlement in the eastern Zaporozhye direction. As you can see, the Russians were using artillery, aviation, drones. The Russians were using all types of weapons they have, and here we can see how exactly the fightings for the settlement were taking place. And in the final part of this video we can see at least 5 episodes where Russians were raising their Russian flag, mainly through the southern and the southwestern and the western parts of the settlement of Verkhnia Tersa. Based on this video, based on the report published by the Minister of Defense, based on the report that was published by the Group of Forces East, we have adjusted the map and we have colored the entire settlement and the complete Russian control. Once again, here we have 5 flags, and these flags, as you can see, were raised mainly through the southern, central and the western parts of the settlement. We haven't received even a single flag from the Romantichna Strait, from the most northern parts of the settlement, but we believe that we haven't received even a single flag from this area, because it seems that the Ukrainians are still probably in this area, probably some pockets of resistance, and it's still dangerous to make videos in this area because the Ukrainians control these territories with FPV drones. Now let's discuss the changes on the ground. This is the end of the 20th of May of 2026. So as you can see, during the 20th of May of 2026, we received lots of updates that confirmed that the Russians were about to establish complete control over the settlement. By the end of the 21st of May of 2026, we have colored the settlement of Verkhnia Tersa completely. We received reports published by different sources that the Ukrainians lost strong control over the settlement, and this morning pro-Russian sources confirmed that the village was captured by the Russians completely. The settlement of Verkhnia Tersa is a very important settlement through the eastern Zaporozhye direction. Basically, with the fall of the settlement of Verkhnia Tersa, we can say that the Ukrainian eastern defenses began collapsing, and this is a very important situation. Most likely during the next 5-10 days we will receive the same reports about the settlements of Vasylivka. As you can see, according to the latest changes, the Russians either are about to establish complete control over the settlement, or they have already established and now they're trying to secure the territory. And something similar we will receive in coming days about the settlement of Dobropillia, because as you can see, the Ukrainians, according to different sources, control just the central and the western parts of the settlement. And today, as you can see, we have additional changes on the ground. So for example, this is the end of the 20th of May, this is the end of the 21st of May, and this is already the beginning of the 22nd of May of 2026. The Russians, as you can see, have improved their position significantly, and this morning pro-Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking Russians through the eastern parts of the settlement, which means that the Russians are already inside of the city and the Russians continue advancing further in the western direction. So it seems that the eastern flank of the Zaporozhye direction is about to collapse, and the Russians are about to break through the most important and the most fortified area before the beginning of battles for the cities of Orekhov and Zaporozhye. And telling the truth, it took the Russians 5 months before collapsing this line. 5 months the Russians have been fighting for this territory, and they're continuing doing, but as you can see, this was one of the longest battles through the Zaporozhye direction. Just to point your attention, I would like to discuss with you this situation. For example, this is the map by the end of the 31st of December of 2025. The Russians just captured the settlement of of Gulyaipolye. The Russians just crossed the river of Gaichur, and the Russians just began concentrating of their troops on the Ukrainian side of the river, and the Russians just began preparations before moving further in the western direction. So once again, this is the end of the 31st of December of 2025, and this is the situation. By the beginning of the 22nd of May of 2026, the Russians have captured just several dozens square kilometers, but these dozens of square kilometers are the most important dozens, which means that the most important defensive line of Ukraine have collapsed, and now the Russians most likely will face less resistance when moving further in the western direction towards the most important city before the city of Zaporozhye. We're talking about the settlement of Orekhov and the Orekhov agglomeration. We believe and we expect that in coming days the Russians will announce complete control over the settlement of Gulyaipolske, and somewhere during the same period of time the Russians will announce about the same situation, about the similar situation, about the settlement of Vasylivka, and then Russians will continue offensive operation further with the purpose to attack the city of Orekhov from behind. As for the city of Orekhov, the Ukrainians continue creating a buffer zone around the settlement. The Ukrainians continue preparing themselves before the beginning of the major battle for the settlement, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 20th of May, this is the end of the 21st of May, and this is the beginning of the 22nd of May of 2026. The Ukrainians are trying to improve their positions around the settlement to create a buffer zone just with one purpose: to win additional time, to win 1 day, 2 days, a week, 3 weeks, a month. They need this time because the Ukrainians, the most important task, the most important thing the Ukrainians are tasked for, to hold the lines around the city of Zaporozhye before winter comes. Zelenskyi and the Ukrainian military authorities believe that if they are able not to lose the city of Zaporozhye before the end of 2026, then most likely they will not lose the city almost till summer of 2027 if the special military operation continues till these dates. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dobropillia direction. These days we have changes as well. We haven't been receiving almost anything from this area probably since the beginning of this month, but during the previous 12 hours we received first changes, and some of these changes were confirmed by videos. And these are the changes on the ground to the south of the settlement of Dobropillia. The Russians, according to media, according to different sources, improved their positions and answered the settlement of Vasylivka, and the Russians continue advancing further in the northern direction. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian forces and Russian soldiers in this area. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in this area. Furthermore, according to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions significantly to the north of the settlement of Bylytske, and this is another key settlement in the Dobropillia and through the entire line of combat contact direction. So, for example, once again, very interesting to see the situation. This is, for example, the end of the 31st of December of 2025, and this is exactly the moment when the battle for the settlement of Bylytske began. So, for example, this is the end of the 30th of December, and this is the beginning, the end of the 31st of December of 2025. So almost 5 months ago, and we see that first pro-Russian sources reported that the Russians answered this settlement, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 22nd of May of 2026. The Russians managed to improve their positions significantly during these days. The Russians managed to outflank the settlement from the north, from the south, but we still receive reports that Ukrainians show fierce resistance on the territory, and the Ukrainians don't want to lose control over the settlement, over this key settlement, because they understand if they lose control over the city of Bylytske, then Russians will be able to answer these villages, and basically the battle for Dobropillia begins. But according to these changes, we see that the settlement of Bylytske is already encircled by Russians from the north and from the south. Something similar we just discussed through the Zaporozhye direction, which means that the days for the settlement of Bylytske are numbered. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation a bit further. We have reports that the Russians also improved their positions between the cities of Drushkovka and Dobropillia, and these are the changes on the ground. The Russians continue sending deeper their sabotage and reconnaissance groups in the northern direction with the purpose to cut logistics, to make problems to Ukrainian forces in this area. But another important thing, that the Russians also began bombing and attacking this territory with artillery and with drones, which means that the Russians are trying to operate and to work in this area not just with sabotage and reconnaissance drones, but the Russians intensify the number of assets and the number of means they have, began using artillery and aviation, which means that this direction is becoming more and more primary for the Russians. As for the city of Konstantinovka, during the previous 12 hours we haven't received anything, and probably during the previous 48 hours we haven't received anything. These are the last changes that we received from the area of the city of Konstantinovka, and they're dated on the 20th of May of 2026. And if we compare the map with the 31st of December, we'll see that the changes in this area are not so big. So this is the end of the 31st of December. During the previous 5 months, the Russians were basically fighting just for the southwestern and the western parts of the settlement, and this is the beginning of the 22nd of May of 2026. The Russians have improved their positions, and we see that they managed to advance significantly, but still the Ukrainians show fierce resistance. As for the Kramatorsk direction, during the previous nights, the Russians were attacking the Kramatorsk agglomeration using dozens of drones. As you can see in these videos, lots of explosions were recorded. Warehouses and ammo depots of the armed forces of Ukraine to the west of the city of Kramatorsk were completely destroyed by the Russians. As for the eastern Slaviansk direction, the Russians continue attacking the city of Nikolaivka with aviation. It seems that the Russians began preparation before a major battle for this territory as well. I would like to remind you that these days the Russians are advancing in this area, but there are still very heavy clashes for the settlement of Alexandrovka, for the territory to the east of Nikolaivka. But everybody understand that the days for these territories are numbered, and sooner or later the battle for Nikolaivka will begin, and most likely the battle for Nikolaivka will start somewhere during June of 2026, which means just within the next several weeks. Also, we have changes through the eastern parts of the city of Lyman. This is the situation by the end of the 21st of May, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 22nd of May. The Russians, as you can see, improved their positions and managed to improve their position through the eastern parts. We came to this conclusion based on the video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking and FPV droning Russians in this area. And based on these videos, we have adjusted the map. The Russians continue advancing, and I would like to remind you that according to the chief of the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, the Russians control up to 85% of the city, but we don't see this on the map of any mappers. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction. During the previous 12 hours, the Russians intensified their offensive operation in this area. In this video, we can see how the Russians attacked military mobile fire group of the armed forces of Ukraine. The Russians attacked this mobile fire group with drones, and as a result of attack, the group was destroyed. And the Russians, during the previous 12 hours, improved their position significantly through the river of Volchansk. And these are the changes on the ground according to different sources. And as you can see, these days we have lots of changes in this area, and it seems that in coming days the group of forces north will give us additional updates. The Russians, according to the group of forces north, are actively storming the settlement of Okhrymivka, which is located next to the village of Chaikovka in the eastern direction. So these are the changes on the ground, and this is the report that was published by the group Group of Forces North, the Russians stated that they managed to improve their positions for several hundred meters on the territory of the settlement. Furthermore, the Russians stated that during the previous days, the Russians improved their positions through the settlement of Budarki. The Russians improved their positions for 1,000 meters from the settlement of Zemlyanki in the western direction, which means that in coming days, most likely the Group of Forces North will announce complete control over this territory as well. The Russians continue advancing along the river of Volcha, and obviously they are tasked to take this territory under complete control during the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then the Russians will begin moving further in the southern direction. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians continue their counterattacks in this area as well, trying to cut the main logistic lines of Russians and not to allow them to develop their offensives in the direction of BELARUS-UKRAINE, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. According to different sources, the Ukrainians continue offensive operation. Now let's talk about the central Kharkiv direction. These days, the Russians, according to different sources, began another offensive operation from the area of the village of Krasny Hutor in the direction of the settlement of Kozacha Lopan. The Group of Forces North stated that as for the settlement of Granov, the Russians improved their positions for 400 meters on the territory of the village itself. Based on this report, we have added additional infiltration zone in contested area. The Russians continue offensive, and I would like to remind you that during these months, during 2026, the Russians several weeks ago reported that they have captured the settlement of Vetera, and now we see that the Russians began fighting for the next village in this area, and it seems that the Russians are tasked to establish a buffer zone like this between M2 roads through the settlements of Granov, Shevchenka, further in the direction of the village of Vetera, and probably from these positions the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Kozacha Lopan. Now let's talk about the Sumy direction. Here we have also important updates. According to the Group of Forces North, the Russians continue offensive operation, and currently the Russians are fighting for the settlement of Psyol. The Russians reported that either they have already finished the battle for the settlement or the Russians are about to do this. The sources are saying that the Russians right now are focused to secure the territories because the Russians are saying that there are lots of basements and positions and pockets of resistance with the Ukrainian forces, and now the Russians are focused to secure the territory before the Russians announce complete control over the territory. These are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 21st of May and this is the beginning of the 22nd of May of 2026, and as we can see, the Russians continue advancing. So as you can see, the Russian late spring military campaign, military offensive operation is gaining momentum, and almost every single day we receive more and more updates and more changes on the ground, and we believe that in the future this process will only intensify. Meanwhile, pro-Ukrainian sources began publishing very interesting updates from the southern Zaporozhye direction. Let's once again discuss the Zaporozhye direction, but this time from the position of planning of the armed forces of Ukraine. First of all, and the most important thing is M14 road. This is the road that was built by Russians and improved by Russians, and this road connects the cities of Rostov-on-Don, Taganrog, Mariupol, and then further Berdyansk, and then further in the direction of the city of Melitopol. And when this road gets the city of Melitopol, the Russians use forces and these logistics to support their units in the Zaporozhye direction and in the defense operation of the city of Energodar. But pro-Ukrainian sources began publishing updates that they have established complete fire control over this M14 road, and almost every single day we receive a video of how Ukrainians attack vehicles, fuel trucks through this road with drones, with looted drones, with FPV drones, and so on. In this video we can see a military truck that was destroyed as a result of FPV drone attack or a drone attack from the Ukrainian side. Here we have an article, and here we have at least 7 episodes that were recorded by different sources of how Ukrainians were attacking different vehicles of the armed force of the Russian Federation along this road. In this video we can see a Ukrainian drone itself flying over this road seeking for its target. In this video we can see a civilian who was filming a Ukrainian drone that was flying along this road, probably searching for vehicles of the armed force of the Russian Federation. In this video, we can see another episode of destroyed military vehicle of the armed force of the Russian Federation. The thing is that the Ukrainians are able to use the Starlink equipment in this area, so that is why for Ukrainians it's not a very big problem to establish complete control over these territories with drones. And I would like to point your attention that since the beginning of March of 2026, the armed forces of Ukraine have destroyed dozens of air defense systems and air defense units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this area. And for example, here we can see the number of updates from this area, and all these updates are about just the same things, how Ukrainians using different drones were attacking air defense positions and air defense forces of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this area. In this video that was published, for example, on the 4th of May of 2026, we can see how several radars and several air defense systems of the armed forces of the Russian Federation were destroyed. So these attacks led to the situation that currently the Russians have probably huge problems with air defense forces in this area, and the gap in air defense systems allowed the Ukrainians to establish a certain control over this territory. And of course, this control over this road can lead to problems for Russians who are currently attacking the city of Orekhov and who are currently trying to advance through the entire Zaporozhye direction. Most likely the Russians will fix this situation, but who knows how many vehicles and how many trucks and forces of the Russians would be attacked by the Ukrainians before the Russians are able to stabilize the situation. And if the Russians stabilize the situation in this area, first of all, they would be forced to take some air defense systems from some other direction and to make some other direction unprotected before these attacks. Another important video is coming from the city of Energodar. Today, according to information we have, Russian partisans raised the Russian flag on the territory of the city of Nikopol. Here we have at least 2 flags that were raised by Russian or pro-Russian forces in this area, by pro-Russian partisans, guerrilla forces. And I would like to remind you that several weeks ago, the Ukrainians announced a total evacuation from this area. We have covered most of the important updates regarding the conflict, regarding the situation on the ground. Few more things. During the previous night, both the Russians and the Ukrainians attacked each other with a big number of drones. The Ukrainians published this picture where we can see the approximate routes of attacks. The pro-Ukrainian sources stated that Iraqi Ukrainians used 310 drones to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. Russians stated that overnight they destroyed 217 drones, and during the evening 101 drones, one drone, and during the previous morning around 196 drones. So more than around 600 drones were destroyed by Russians during this period of time. Telling the truth, we haven't received almost anything from the territory of the central Russia, which means that either the Ukrainians were using decoys that were forced to discover the situation, or the Russians managed to destroy everything without any problems. But this morning we received the video from the city of Starobelsk of the Luhansk region, and here we have lots of videos, lots of episodes about an attack that was carried out by the Ukrainians between the 21st and the 22nd of May of 2026. And as you can see, according to this video, a building was significantly damaged and destroyed on the territory of the city of Starobelsk. The sources stated that this was a building of a local college, and this building, as you can see, was completely destroyed as a result of attack. So this is the situation, and the sources are saying that there are casualties among civilians, and the Russians were forced several times to stop the evacuation, let's say operation, due to risks of next attacks from the Ukrainian side in the same direction. So that is why the Russians are not able to finish this rescue operation, because there is always a threat that Ukrainians would attack the same territory once again, while the Russians are trying to secure the situation. So this is the reason, this is the most important thing. Another important situation is that the conflict between Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and Lukashenko, the president of the Republic of Belarus, continues. During the previous evening, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, made lots of statements. Zelensky said that Kiev wants Zelensky threatens preemptive strikes against Belarus. If there is a threat from Belarusian territory or Russian border regions, Ukraine is ready to act preemptively. This is the most important thing. The second one, Zelensky also said that these days he was talking a lot about that the Belarusians are preparing some offensives. But the president of the Republic of Belarus said that Belarus is not going to get involved in the conflict in Ukraine. There is no need for that. It will only be involved in one case if aggression is committed on our territory. So we need to understand one important thing about this situation. Also, the president of Belarus stated that Belarus is ready to meet with Zelensky and discuss issues in Belarusian-Ukrainian relations. The Belarusian leader admitted that such a meeting could take place on Ukrainian territory if needed. Belarus does not intend to be drawn into the conflict in Ukraine. Minsk could be drawn into military action if their country's territory is subject to aggression. So the most important thing that we need to understand between Belarus and Ukraine are the following. The first one is that due to the situation with the Russian oil refineries, due to the fact that Ukrainians intensified their attacks on these refineries, Russia currently, despite different reports and updates, Russia currently has problems with this. We understand this because almost every single day we receive the video of another fire broken out from the territory of this or that oil refinery. But Russia has two more oil refineries that the Ukrainians are not able to attack in any case. And we are talking about oil refineries that are located on the territory of Belarus, the closest ally of the Russian Federation. The first one is the Mozr oil refinery, this one, the biggest one on the territory of the Republic of Belarus. And the distance between each positions of Ukraine to this oil refinery is just 30 kilometers, which means that Ukrainians have possibilities to attack this oil refinery or even with FPV drones without problems. But they can't do this, and we need to understand that the Russians use this oil refinery for 100% capacity. So the Russians are sending billions of tons of oil, barrels of oil, with the purpose to load this refinery as much as possible, because the Russians understand that Ukrainians are not able to attack this refinery, because if they do this, this is going to be a war between Belarus and Ukraine immediately, according to words of the president of Belarus. And the second refinery is located in the northern parts of Belarus, in the area of Naftans, in the area of the city of Polis. So this is the second. Probably this is the biggest. This is the second oil refinery and the first biggest on the territory of the Republic of Belarus. And the distance to this oil refinery is less than 400 kilometers, so which means that Ukrainians have means to attack this oil refinery as well, and the Russians use this oil refinery at full capacity, obviously, and which means that the Russians are able to save stability through Russia thanks to these refineries as well. And of course, Zelensky also understands this, and all the conflict between Belarus and Ukraine probably also at the final point can lead to the situation when Ukrainians will try to attack these both refineries. The second important thing is the situation from Belarus. I would like to remind you that the United States of America several months ago lifted sanctions on Belarus on the Belarusian potash, but the Belarusians are not able to export potash through Baltic states because the European Union haven't lifted sanctions on Belarus, and the Belarusians are forced to use railways and ports of the Russian Federation, and sometimes it's not so comfortable. For Belarusians, it's much more better to use railways between Belarus and Lithuania and to use Klaipėda port infrastructure of Lithuania of the European Union. And the United States of America asked Ukrainians to convince Europeans to lift sanctions on Belarus. So these are the situation, and these are the things that right now Belarus and Ukraine are trying to resolve. Ukrainians probably are ready to convince Europeans to lift sanctions on Belarusian potash, but in exchange that Belarusians will reduce the number of oil they receive from the territory of the Russian Federation. And of course, the Belarusians, they don't want to do this. They want to save either the 100% load capacity of its oil refineries, and they want to have access to the port infrastructure of Lithuania. So this is the main conflict, and this is probably all the things about we see between Belarus and Ukraine these days. And that's it for the short video. The military summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.